hopefully get into the Department of Aging and Disabilities. We have people on WebEx, so if you are on WebEx, would you please make sure your button is muted until it's time for you to visit with us and tell us what we need to know. We will begin with Department of Children and Families, and we have Amy Deckert here to give us an overview.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. You should have the budget analysis for the Department for Children and Families in front of you. That begins on page 1051. Just to remind you, the Department for Children and Families is a cabinet-level agency headed by a secretary appointed by the governor. Its mission is to protect children, promote healthy families, and encourage personal responsibility. It does operate through 7 programs. Turning to page 1052, the agency requested a fiscal year 2022 expenditures of $1.1 billion, including $365.4 million from the State General Fund. This is an all funds increase of $335.1 million, or 42.4% above the approved amount. This is largely attributable to increased federal funds due to the COVID-19 pandemic. This is a State General Fund decrease of approximately $500,000 or 0.1% below the approved amount. This is primarily attributable to decreases in the CAPERS employer contribution rate, as well as monies inadvertently appropriated for the Hope Ranch pilot program twice during the 2021 legislative session. The SGF decrease is partially offset by an increase in unemployment insurance employer contributions.
Amy, how did that happen on the Hope Ranch? Was it just error and when you guys were putting everything in or something?
So yes, as my recollection is that there was a veto on the mega bill where the language was vetoed, but not the funding. And then when it was added in the omnibus bill, in addition to adding the language back, the money got added back also. I can confirm that, but yes, that was definitely an error. The governor's recommendation for fiscal year 2022 is $1.1 billion, including $348.1 million from the State General Fund. This is an all funds decrease of $18.4 million or 1.6% below the agency's 2022 revised estimate. The governor's recommendation does include a decrease of $17 million below the revised estimate. The Human Service Caseload estimate for fiscal year 2022 was a decrease of $1.9 million in federal funds for TANF cash assistance and a decrease of $16.5 million, including $17 million from the State General Fund for foster care, below the prior estimates. The decrease in TANF cash assistance estimates is primarily attributable to the availability of COVID-19 stimulus funds. The decrease in the foster care program is primarily attributable to $10 million in reappropriated State General Fund monies from fiscal year 2021, as well as maintaining case management provider rates at the 2021 levels as adopted from the reduced resource options presented to the 2021 legislature. Also, the projected number of children in the program is slightly lower than the spring estimate, and there is a slight increase in the projected average cost per child. The governor does recommend 2,657.9 FTE positions, which is the same number as the agency's revised estimate. Turning to page 1053 for fiscal year 2023. The agency's request is $979.3 million, including $371 million from the State General Fund. This is an all funds decrease of $145.4 million, or 12.9% below the 2022 revised estimate. This is largely attributable to federal COVID-19 relief funds no longer being available for 2023. This decrease is partially offset by 11 enhancement requests totaling $23.5 million, including $15.6 million from the State General Fund. It is a state general fund increase of $6 million, or 1.6% above the agency's fiscal year 2023 request. The governor's, that should be above the agency's 2022 revised estimate, attributable to the agency's 11 enhancement requests. The governor recommends 2023 expenditures of $972.5 million, including $367.3 million from the state general fund. This is an all funds decrease of $6.7 million, or 0.7% below the agency's FY 2023 request. This is primarily attributable to adopting the Human Service Consensus Caseload estimates from the fall of 2021, as well as not recommending all of the agency's enhancement requests. In the fall of 2021, the Human Service Consensus Caseload estimates was a decrease of $2.3 million in federal funds for TANF cash assistance and an increase of $500,000, including $1 million from the State General Fund for foster care from the prior estimate. The increase in foster care is due to an anticipated fluctuation in contract expenditures based on changing acuity and service needs of children in care. This increase also includes replacing $3 million from special revenue funds. That was a one-time reduction as part of the governor's reduced resources budget in fiscal year 2022. The governor does recommend funding $18.6 million, including $10.9 million from the State General Fund of the agency's enhancement requests. I'll go into more detail on the enhancements in a little later in the analysis. With your permission, Madam Chair, I'll turn to page 1056. Give you a little more detail on fiscal year 2022. So for the current year, the agency reappropriated $18.9 million in unspent state general fund monies. The agency's estimate made several adjustments, including some child care stabilization grants. There was a new program, the Child Care Stabilization, that was created as a result of the agency receiving $106.9 million in federal funds from the American Rescue Plan Act to assist child care providers with salaries and wages, rent, utilities, and other necessities to stabilize their businesses. There's also some child care quality grants from the Federal Child Care Development Fund, discretionary funds, to provide grants for child care providers of $152.9 million. The Low Energy Assistance Program received an additional $54.8 million in federal funds to assist more low-income families with energy bills and weatherization projects.
Amy, do you know where that's coming from? Is that like, and you know, if you don't know, we can get it later, but on that low income, is that new program money or money we've had, or is it like, you know, ARPA, or is it the new stimulus program?
I am not sure. I will have to get back to you on that.
Okay, thanks. I just wondered if it's a long-term program we've had or if it's something new.
I know it's going into an existing program, but I will find out where the additional money came from.
Thank you.
At the top of page 1057, for independent living, the agency received $5 million from federal COVID-19 pandemic funds and was awarded $250,000 in federal funds from the We Can Drive program for independent living youth. And then item 6 is other adjustments for budget changes. The governor's recommendation includes expenditures totaling $1.1 billion and includes those Human Service Consensus Caseload adjustments I mentioned earlier. Madam Chairman, I would turn your attention to page 1058, which illustrates the changes from actual expenditures for fiscal year 2022. The DCF estimates revised 2022 expenditures of $1.1 billion, including $365.1 million from the State General Fund. This is an increase of $379.1 million above 2021 actual expenditures. This is largely due to increased federal funds received from the Child Care Development Fund. As I mentioned, the new program, the Child Care Stabilization, was created as a result of the agency receiving $106.9 million in federal funds. This was from the American Rescue Plan Act, which authorized the funding to assist child care providers with salaries and wages, rent, utilities, and other necessities. Additionally, those child care development funds and the LEAP monies. Additionally, I would note those reappropriated state general fund monies. Turning your attention to page 1063, the agency's enhancement request for fiscal year 2023.
You said 63. Didn't
Yes, 1063. And Madam Chairman, the next 4 pages are enhancement requests by the agencies. The governor recommends a portion of these requests. The first request, request 1, is an enhancement for Family First Prevention Services SGF only grants. This would increase the state general fund monies to sustain current grant programs that do not qualify for the criteria through the California Evidence-Based Clearinghouse. So they do not qualify for the 50% federal funding. The governor partially recommended the enhancement request totaling $1.4 million from the state general fund. The agency had requested $2.8 million. Request number 2 was an enhancement of $3.7 million, including $3.6 million from the state general fund for salary increases for protection specialists, to bring the salaries up by at 12.5%, not to exceed market rate, receiving at least a minimum of 2.5% increase. Request number 3 is an increase of $3.5 million, including $745,000 from the state general fund for the Kansas Management Information System replacement. The governor does recommend adoption of this request. On page 1064, request 4, the agency requests $1.9 million, including $900,000 from the state general fund for the Amazon Connect Virtual Contact Center to establish a virtual contact center to allow employees to work remotely when necessary. The governor does recommend adoption of this request. Request 5 is the addition of $735,000, including $156,000 from the state general fund for additional pre-employment transition services, to add 10 pre-employment transition services specialist FTE positions and 2 pre-employment transition services manager positions. The governor does not recommend adoption of this request. Request number 6 is the addition of $158,000, all from the state general fund, to add 2 FTE positions within the Kansas Commission for the Deaf and Hard of Hearing. The governor does not recommend adoption of this request. At the top of page 1065, request number 7 is a request to add $1.5 million, all from the state general fund, for the independent living subsidy for foster care youth, to increase the monthly subsidy rate. The governor partially recommends this request, adding $756,000 from the state general fund. Request number 8 is the request to add $1 million, including $920,000 from the state general fund, to add funding for high-quality legal representation through a pilot program to provide legal representation for parents involved in a report assigned for assessment or investigation. The governor does not recommend adoption of this request. Request number 9 is a request for $7 million, including $3.5 million from the state general fund, to allow the department to expand the Families First Prevention Program. The governor does recommend adoption of this request.
Amy, before you turn the page, I'll just start with the last one first. On Families First Prevention, that first came with a lot of money, right? from the federal government when we first started that, or a lot of match. And we're putting quite a bit more in it. I mean, can you give me the history of, I remember when we started this, and I thought there was a, you know, a carrot there, and I'm just wondering if they gave more and now they're less, and where we're at on that. Are we serving more people, or is this just something we've, from the beginning, pumped that much money in? So you can get back with me. And then my other question is, I'm trying to read quickly. I'm trying to understand this Amazon Connect virtual contact center. Okay, so why can't we use WebEx? And just what's the difference then?
Madam Chairman, I will get you more information. I believe this is due to the fact that there are call centers that require, if those individuals need to work remotely, the call centers need to have a different technology than WebEx on that. But I would be happy to get you some more information on that.
Okay, thank you. Now I'm ready to turn the page.
So top of page 1066, request 10, the agency requested $428,000, including $416,000 from the state general fund for the addition of 6 supervisor FTE positions to supervise students in the child welfare practicum internships. The governor did not recommend adoption of this request. Request 11 was the addition of $850,000 from the state general fund for the renovation of the first floor lobby and interview rooms at the Topeka Service Center. The governor partially recommends funding the enhancement request in the amount of $450,000 from the Project Maintenance Reserve Fund. And I might, if with your permission, turn you to the capital improvement section on page 1095. Might note then that for fiscal year 2022, the agencies requested capital improvements totaling $353,000, all from the Project Maintenance Reserve Fund. This is the same amount approved by the 2021 legislature. The agency is updating all lights, including those in the garage, to LED lighting, which is expected to decrease overall building power consumption. Also is replacing the flooring on the first floor. The governor does concur with the agency's 2022 revised estimate. For fiscal year 2023, the agency is requesting capital improvements totaling $850,000. This is an increase of $496,000 above the revised estimate. That is entirely that enhancement request I just mentioned, and the $450,000 is the partial adoption that I mentioned with that change in funding source. I'd be happy to attempt to answer any questions you might have.
Questions for Amy? Senator Petty.
Amy, back to the pages we were on, if I can get back to on the request number 6, Enhancement Communication Access Services. Do you know if this, I know this has been an issue we've been dealing with in education for the school for the deaf, but do you know if these positions that are, these 2 positions that are requested, what their purpose is for?
I will have to get you some more information.
Because we've been talking about this connect, you know, for their to do the assessments, and I just wondered if this was playing into that with their connection between the Department of Health and Environment and the State Board of Education. So
I will get you some more information, Senator.
All right. I think we're good. Thank you, Amy. At this time, we will turn our attention to Secretary Howard, the DCF, but with the DCF budget overview. Welcome, Secretary.
Great, thank you, Madam Chair, and thanks for the opportunity to present remotely today. I appreciate that very much. I'm pleased to be here to talk about the DCF budget. I have a long PowerPoint. We won't go over all the pages, but I will try to orient you to the information that you have, and I'll provide some relevant updates on some key issues that relate to the budget recommendations, and also talk further with you about the recommendations themselves. So DCF, as this committee well knows, is an agency that's focused on protecting children, strengthening families, and promoting adult self-sufficiency. If you turn to page 5 of the handout, you see our major program areas. We really have 4 major program areas, and I'll touch very briefly on each of those in the pages that follow. So on page 6, what I think of as our benefit programs are our economic and employment services programs. And these are really the programs that help families serve as a safety net and help families achieve self-sufficiency. It's everything from the core cash program with TANF to food assistance to child care assistance, the employment assistance that wraps around each of those programs, and the energy assistance program. As Amy already mentioned, and I'll have a chart for this in a few pages, this is an area of our budget where we received significant new federal dollars during the pandemic from a variety of the different federal relief bills, with the highest amount of those dollars coming into child care to support both families in accessing child care and to support the child care network and to stabilize that network during the pandemic and the economic downturn. We also received a number of new funds in our energy assistance within the ARPA program. Funding was added to the longstanding low-income energy assistance program, which helps families with heating assistance, about a 50% increase in that program. And then a new water program was started that's a one-time program that we're just now kicking off to assist families who might be facing disconnection from their water bills. The thing I would say about economic and employment services, this is an area where there's been tremendous demand, tremendous impact in terms of my teams across the state and our regional offices, managing lots of new programs, managing lots of program changes. And I'm just really proud of the work they've done during these last 2.5 years to really keep those benefits flowing, to not have significant backlogs or anything like that. The second program, and probably what we tend to talk most about in DCF, which you'll see on page 7, is prevention and protection services. These are all of our services related to child welfare, as well as adult protective services. But this really runs the gamut of those core protection services through the Protection Report Center, the Child Abuse Hotline, all of the prevention services, family preservation, Family First, as well as the foster care and adoption services. We also play a licensing role in licensing foster homes and child care facilities. The third program that DCF manages is rehabilitation services. This includes vocational rehabilitation for individuals with a disability seeking employment. We also have an independent living portion of that program. And then we also have targeted resources to serve older Kansans who are blind or visually impaired. The last piece of rehabilitation services is some work we do at the behest of the Federal Social Security Administration. It's 100% federally funded, but we serve as the disability determination agency for Kansas. Rehabilitation services is DDS is entirely federally funded. Most of the remainder of the programs are almost 80% federally funded, so very, very heavily federally resourced. And then the fourth area, and I know you've had some conversations about this already in your committee, is the child support services, the contracted programs related to assisting individuals to achieve their child support, through everything from establishing parentage orders, locating those non-custodial parents, and enforcing or modifying those orders as necessary. So those are like those really four big buckets as you think about DCF. And I just included a map on page 10 to show you where our service centers are. We function in what we think of as 6 regions, but we actually have 36 service centers, offices across the state where individuals can come to access benefits or receive services, and that our other staff work out of, who go out into the field to do the protective services work or the licensing work or some of the employment services work. I'll move you over to slide 12 and stop for just a minute and focus on some of the federal pandemic funding that came into DCF. You've already had some dialogue about that during Amy's review. We've received funding at DCF through 4 different federal pandemic relief acts. The CARES Act of 2020, the Families First Coronavirus Response Act of 2020, the Coronavirus Response and Relief Supplemental Appropriations Act of 2021, and then ARPA. You see really large increases in the DCF budget in fiscal year 2022, slightly less in 2023, as we begin to have less of those resources to spend down. But if I could just have you look at the table on this page, this lists each of those areas. But if I would draw your attention to the 4th and 5th line, the Child Care Development Block Grant, the Child Care Crisis Stabilization Grants, you can see that of the total awards that we've received as an agency for almost $571 million, you can see that the bulk of that has been in the arena of childcare. So again, significant resources to be spent out over several years. Amy already talked about much of the focus on stabilization of the network, sustainability grants out to providers across the state. Also increases in the ability of individuals to access services through the Hero Relief Act that we stood up, some expansion in the income levels and some reductions in the family share. But again, the vast majority in childcare, you'll see right above that, the low-income energy assistance and water assistance program. But yeah, LEAP received an increase of $48 million, so significant impact to a long-standing program that we've long administered. I mean, we could talk about any of the items on this page, but I wanted to just let you know that they're really focused in terms of where those funds are targeted that have come in. What you don't see here, and that I'll show you when we get to a caseload chart, is also the significant increase in SNAP in food assistance expenditures. You might recall SNAP benefits don't show up in our budget as an on-budget item. I mean, they're really off budget, but I'll show you a caseload chart that will show you the changes that have happened within SNAP, both in terms of some benefit increases that the federal government authorized on a short-term basis. And then all of the programs that we administered during the pandemic related to the loss of the school lunch program, what we called the pandemic EBT program, where in 2 or 3 stages, we matched up food benefits for youth, both during the school year and in the summertime. And I'll show you those numbers when we get to some caseload pages. The next few pages of the document, and you'll see similar slides for 2022 and 2023, just give you some visual representations of our budget. I don't intend to go through these in any detail, but again, on slide 13, in the very first line of the total budget, you'll see a change from 2021 to 2022 of $352 million. But if you look to the bottom of the page, more almost $308 million of that are those federal relief dollars that I just spoke with you about. So the federal relief dollars really skew the DCF budget. And you can see that very clearly on page 14, where we list our expenditures by program. We felt like it was important this year to split out our regular expenditures from those things that are short-term from the pandemic. So the light blue on the chart shows those pandemic relief dollars, and you can really see that in our economic and employment support area, where those LEAP dollars show up, where those child care dollars show up. That really makes that part of our agency the largest program, which it typically is not. I'll go ahead again and move through these again on page 16. If I move to that page, I guess just one more way to illustrate the impact of those federal pandemic dollars. Again, in terms of child care, taking on such significance in terms of resources and expenditures within our agency. You can see that in the context of $341 million. Without the pandemic dollars, we would have been spending more in the range of about $70 million. I'm going to move on to page 18, and I think Amy talked about the fact that we had some position changes in the budget in fiscal year 22 from the approved budget. These were all positions funded through federal dollars, some of which were really to help absorb some of the added workload in our field offices. Those will go away as the federal relief dollars go away. So these are not permanent. These will not be permanent positions. So the current year budget on page 19, we don't have any supplementals. And as Amy talked about, the only adjustments really are related to the consensus caseload estimates. And the foster care estimate, showed a reduction in youth served and some issues to do with Fmap and some funding shifts, as well as a slight increase in the cost per child. So not a lot of budget issues. We don't have a lot of concerns, frankly, in the current year budget as we look at that. And a little bit later on, I'll give you a few updates from some things that you funded last year that I want to make sure you're aware of what steps we've taken with those items. Fiscal year, the next few pages give you the very same kinds of charts in fiscal year 2023. So I'm not going to go over those all over again. I think the only point I would make on that very first chart on page 20, you'll see our total budget actually showing a decrease in all funds from 2022 to 2023. And again, if you look at the last line, that's because federal pandemic funds estimated spending go down about $146 million. So without that, we would have about a $13 million increase. So again, that funding just really skews what our budget looks like. And I just wanted to make the committee aware of that. I'm going to skip ahead, not repeat these charts again, and go over to a more focused conversation of the fiscal year 2023 budget. I would turn your attention to slide 26, which is just a high-level summary chart that reflects the governor's recommendation to provide $10.9 million from the state general fund and $18.6 million from all funds for a number of enhancements that we request as an agency. The other adjustments are the consensus caseload estimates that Amy talked with you about already. So I wanted to spend a little bit of time on those enhancements and certainly ask your support to keep those funds in the budget. And I wanted to start with Families First. And the governor has two enhancements in the budget for Family First. Just a little bit of background, and perhaps to answer the chair's question a little bit as well on this. In terms of history, when Congress passed the 2018 Family First Prevention Services Act, that meant that for the first time, states had the opportunity to claim federal child welfare resources for prevention services, as opposed to just funding services for youth who come into the custody of the secretary. And the way that program was structured, the intent of the federal government was to identify certain evidence-based programs in 4 categories: mental health, parent skill building, what they call kinship navigation, providing supports to kin who might be able to help and support and take on some youth in their that they know or in their families, and substance use disorders. The way that the act is structured for programs that that qualify for that federal clearinghouse, there's a 50% federal match. We were a state who jumped on this immediately. So we were one of the first 3 or 4 states to get our plan approved by our federal partners, and we started the program the first day we could start it. Frankly, the federal government was a little bit slow reviewing programs and deciding which programs would qualify for those federal match. So we and many other states had to kind of make some judgments when we went through our own grant process. And so the governor's first enhancement provides a little bit of backfill in state general funds for a few programs that we're funding through our grants, but that are not on the federal clearinghouse. They either didn't meet the standard of the federal clearinghouse, or they haven't been reviewed yet. We asked for this funding because despite that, these programs are effective. We know that in Families First, that 89% of the youth who've been referred to Family First are still with their families after 12 months. That means they haven't come into the foster care system, a significant impact as we talk about the foster care caseload, the decline in the foster care caseload. A couple of the grants here that we want to continue, for example, one is the ABC program, which is one of the early childhood parent skill building programs. It's the attachment behavioral catch-up program. This has been a program that's been well regarded in Kansas. There's been a number of evaluations done in the state. United Methodist Health Ministries supported a number of these projects long before Family First. And it's a program where 91% of the youth receiving that have not entered care. Another one of the programs, which is a child advocacy and parenting program in Salina that we funded, 96% of the youth referred to that program have not entered care after 12 months of services. So these are effective programs, even though they're not on the federal clearinghouse, and we don't want to abolish those programs. We want to be able to continue those. So the governor essentially is allowing us the SGF for the federal funds we won't be able to claim for those programs. Our initial request was higher because there were a few other programs that were not yet on the clearinghouse, but from the time we first put our budget in until it was time for budget appeals, a couple of those other programs were approved. So that's the first item, is to say, despite these not being on the federal clearinghouse and not qualifying for federal match, they've been effective in supporting families and keeping kids out of the foster care system. The second is an actual peer enhancement expansion of Family First. And what the governor is recommending is a $7 million expansion. The federal government would pay half of that. State general fund dollars would pay the other half. That really expands the program by about 50%. And that really would allow us to serve more families. Right now, as we sit today, we have waiting lists in different parts of the state at different points in time for different programs. For example, some of the mental health programs, family functional therapy, multisystemic therapy, very, very effective with teens and older youth. We've had waiting lists at different points throughout the year in parts of the state. Right now, we have waiting lists in a number of counties for the Seeking Safety program. And also, when we first put out the request for proposal, the grant applications far exceeded the funding that we had available at that time. So again, a program that we so appreciate the legislature supporting at the front end, the governor supporting, where we can now show, real data and outcomes. And by the way, we have evaluation partners to the University of Kansas, the School of Social Welfare, and the Center for Public Partnerships. They're doing in-depth evaluations of each program that we have funded under Family First, so we know what's effective. That also is part of the federal law that we do that. So again, those are the two Family First enhancements, and I would really ask your support. This had such a significant impact on helping us to really shift from a system that really only had resources primarily to support youth who come into custody and very few resources to prevent that from happening. The third enhancement on page 29 that I would also ask your support for has to do with our own workforce within DCF. These are the protection workers who investigate child abuse and neglect, take those hotline calls, go out and do those investigations. The governor is recommending, as part of this budget, an increase in protection specialist salaries by up to 12.5%, 5 steps not to exceed the market rate. We had turnover over a 1-year period in protection specialists of about 38.3%. About 10 or 12 percentage points higher than our other frontline workers. So really our most critical request. And so again, we would ask your support for that increase. On page 30 is the independent living subsidy for foster care youth. This is a program that provides supports for those youth who age out of the foster care system. They aren't reintegrated with families. They don't have a permanent guardianship. They aren't adopted. So these are those youth who age out. We work with federal independent living dollars to provide various services and supports, including the possibility of a monthly subsidy. Our maximum monthly subsidy has been $350 for these youth. They're eligible to keep that subsidy up to age 21. They're expected to be working, be pursuing school. There's certain outcomes they have to meet. And during the pandemic, with some of those federal relief dollars, there was a set of funds that were targeted for states to provide further assistance for youth during the economic downturn. We were able to use those funds to temporarily increase that monthly subsidy to $700. That will go away. What this enhancement would do from the governor would be to allow us to keep that subsidy for those youth who age out of foster care at a maximum of $700 per month. So again, we would ask your support for that. A few others to mention on page 31, the CAMAS system. This is our case management system for rehabilitation services. This is a one-time cost. This is one-time spending paid for 78.7%, almost 80% from federal dollars. And this really allows us to replace a very, very outdated case management system with a modern system. I don't even recognize the names of the programming language or the database that this system is in. It has green screens that we kind of haven't seen since the 90s. So again, really, really vital to our efforts to assist Kansans with disabilities, and it's a one-time cost. On page 32, the Amazon Connect Virtual Contact Center. As opposed to thinking about like the use of, Zoom or WebEx or things like this, this really allows like a full service call center. And think particularly about the work that DCF does on the benefit side. the cash assistance, the child care assistance, food assistance, as well as our protection report center function. Standing up this contact center, which is a web-based system, has really, not only did it allow the ability to very quickly shift to virtual work and still serve our customers, it's really allowed opportunities for really new customer channels and far greater efficiency. We can see progress that's made on workloads across the state. Staff can work in multiple queues, balance workloads more efficiently. It has the ability to transcribe emails and calls. And it also has an interactive voice response system where customers can get basic answers to some core questions. So again, we stood it up from the context of being able to work virtually very quickly, but it's provided far more value than just that possibility in terms of our clients and their access to services. So we would ask for the resources to sustain that. And then the last one in terms of the enhancement, this is actually funding that comes out of a reserve fund in the lease at our Topeka Service Center. And this is just capital improvements related to renovation of the first floor lobby and interview rooms. And I think Amy did a good job talking about the capital improvements. The next few pages, senators, of the document give you some information on our caseloads. I won't go through every one of those, but you can take a look at those and those trends across all of our programs. I would, though, on slide 34, ask you to look about halfway down the page where it says SNAP food assistance. You'll recall, as I mentioned earlier, these actual benefit dollars don't show up in the state budget as an on-budget item, but I wanted you to see the increase from 2020 to 2021 from $290 million to almost $480 million. Still about $365 million in 2022 before it begins to go back down to more normal levels. This was really the impact of the added programs that we stood up during the pandemic, the food assistance for school children through the pandemic EBT program, as well as some of the added benefit levels that the federal government authorized during a public health emergency. I just wanted you to see that impact on the Kansas economy is significant in terms of the amount of resources families have had to purchase food and the increase in those levels. I might turn you, as we continue to just look at caseloads, I wanted to specifically on page 37, have you take a look at just the graph related to the foster care caseload. And this would reflect the consensus caseload, which projects the number of youth in the current year at an average of 6,640 and keeps that flat next year. As we stand here today, I've talked to you about Family First, other efforts we've made within the child welfare system to serve children with their families. At the end of January, we're already well below that. Just under 6,500 youth in foster care. That's down from 7,600 in January of 2019. So again, those numbers are falling. And again, it's not all related to Family First, but Family First has certainly had an impact on those numbers. I think the other charts are fairly self-explanatory. TANF over the long term continues the downward trend. It had a slight increase in the context of the pandemic, but not significant, and then began to go back down again. On page 39, the bar graph will show the child care assistance caseload. The increase is happening there through the Hero Relief Program, the increase in eligibility for that programming with the various federal relief dollars. I'm starting on page 41 and 42. We've just listed some of our key performance indicators. I'm happy to answer questions about those. I won't go through those. We actually have 95 performance indicators in the budget, and we've tried to pick out some key indicators to share with you. And I'll allow you to look at those as well. I did want to close talking about a few success stories and also giving you status reports on a couple of things that you funded over the last year or two. On page 43, you know, we've already talked about Family First. And again, I can't overstate the success that this program has meant in terms of children staying at home in their families after 12 months from referral. Yeah, we're at 89%. Our goal is 90%. I mean, two of the categories, kinship navigation and mental health, we're at 100% and 90% in those two categories. Page 44, we just mentioned our Kansas practice model, which is, I think, another huge piece of our success with regard to averting the need for foster care when we don't need to bring a child into care for their own safety. We really have worked very hard over the last 2 to 3 years to put in a number of structured processes. One of the most powerful ones has been team decision making, which is really a process where we ensure that at the point where a child may come into custody, or now where a child there may be a need for a placement change, or thinking that there may be a placement change, people that are important to that child, not just professionals, but the child, family members, maybe a community member that they're close to, they come around the table and have candid, facilitated conversations about what would it take to keep this child safe. Really, really powerful evidence-based tool. We've had a lot of support from some partners, Casey Family Programs and others in standing up that model and that approach. And again, very effective. You know, as I said, this slide is really outdated. We currently have 6,498 youth and children in care. We've seen 15% fewer children enter care in 2020 than 2019. 11% fewer in 2021. Let me just highlight a couple of other pieces here. I think on page 45, we again just mentioned some of those child care investments. I'll let you read that. But again, the combination of changes in assistance to families, and then most importantly, I think, even beyond that, is the work that's been done to sustain the network during some really difficult times. I will move you over then to, I think I'll skip a few pages here and just let you read these at your leisure. On page 50, I did want to mention CWIS, our Comprehensive Child Welfare Information System, because you generously supported funding that we've requested for the planning stages of this major IT project for a number of years now, from fiscal year 21 to 23. We did not request new resources in the out year because we still have sufficient resources during the planning stages. You will see us make new requests next year. Just as a reminder, this is really the modernization of our child welfare information systems. It would replace 5 legacy systems of varying ages and capabilities. And we are currently are in the stage of, we've had, our federal partners have approved a 50-50 match for planning. We're seeking their approval for the development stage. We've held vendor demonstrations and we'll be releasing an RFP later this year. But you can see on page 51 that when we do request resources for the actual implementation, those will be significant dollars over the next 4 years. About $50 million state funds, $100 million total. So again, just wanted to make you aware that we've not forgotten that. We've been hard at work on that. Just the planning process, all the work with the federal agencies, the state IT processes has just taken a little bit longer, and we didn't want to request the resources before we needed them. I might skip then just a couple of other status updates I wanted to touch on page 55. I wanted to thank you for your support and funding for, I think, what we were calling Youth Mobile Crisis last year, which is what we're calling the Family Crisis Response and Support System. On October 1st, we started this program through a contract with Beacon Health. What this really is, this is a crisis line for families who are in crisis. This isn't just kids in foster care. This is any family in the state that has a crisis going on with their child. They can call this crisis line. Sometimes that may get resolved over the phone. Sometimes they may just need a referral to a community partner. But sometimes they might need an immediate response. And there are mobile crisis response units then to respond. Beacon is working with the community mental health center system to provide those response levels, which could be as quickly as 60 minutes. So again, significant, huge impact in our system. You'll see in the KDAD's budget, as well as in conjunction with CCBHC, is that the adult side of this will also be moving forward in the coming year. So I just wanted you to be aware of that and that had opened. The next page, Hope Ranch, the pilot project, we submitted a partial year status report to the House Social Service Budget Committee that was included within a proviso last year. We don't have as much data as we would like about this program thus far. It still, I think, is a little too early to fully measure the outcomes and impact. And then we also mentioned a pilot program that you also generously funded last year to support foster youth with their driver's education and related vehicle costs. So, with that, I'll stop and stand for any questions, Madam Chair and members of the committee.
All right, thank you. I have a few questions going back to, let's see here. On the child care funding, I don't know if I'm getting mixed up with some other program. The increases that we've had, I'm looking at or trying to find the child care. Yeah. The increases that we've had, do any of these have to do with helping people with child care assistance so they can go to work, or is that a whole different department?
Well, we have long had a child care subsidy program that serves Kansas families to assist them as they would move into work. What these added funds have done has meant that we were able to increase the eligibility level for those services from 185% to 250% of poverty. We also really put a lot of emphasis on trying to target some of the essential workers during the pandemic. But yes, our subsidy program before and now has been a key work support for families, seeking employment. And in fact, many of our own clients, through SNAP, through TANF, through our other benefit programs, probably the most valuable support they get from us is the child care support that enables them to go to work.
Okay, well, I guess what I'm concerned about in looking at the federal funds, how that has skewed so much of your budget. I'm worried that we're promising people and changing the way we do business in our society, I guess, and then that money's not going to be there. So I hope most of these programs are clearly tied to the pandemic. So as people get back to work, as people get whatever through mental health crisis, as people get whatever, that, we're not going to just start putting SGF dollars in these federal dollars that we've received.
Yeah, I don't see that happening, Senator, on the child care side. You know, as people go back to work, as they gain different jobs, as their income levels change, you know, the amount of subsidy they would qualify would go down until they're no longer eligible. And the bulk of the spending we've done with the new federal relief dollars has really been on the provider side. I mean, really to sustain that workforce. You know, providers have used things for wage support, supply grants, varieties of different pieces through a number of rounds of provider sustainability grants. So again, as that market stabilizes again, I don't see that. I see most of the expenditures outside of the benefit side being things that are far more one time or over a short period of time. So.
Okay, and then on slide 34 on SNAP food assistance,
Yes.
underneath that is SNAP employment and training.
Mm-hmm.
What is that?
We have a program within DCF where we work with individuals who are receiving SNAP assistance. This actually grew out of employment services that we were providing to our TANF clients through what we called our goals program. So we have staff who assist folks in, you know, kind of those job skills kind of training to equip people to go to work. So it's really support around those individuals to seek employment. You can see it's a pretty small amount of expenditure, but frankly, a huge return. We pay for maybe a few things as well under our employment programs where maybe they need a one-time set of tools to be able to take a position. You know, maybe there's a vehicle modification, some things like that. We're very proud of our work programs. We have some great partnerships. I mean, for example, the federal government through USDA, now whenever they're advertising, for example, for meat inspector positions, they call us and we'll actually do virtual job fairs with our customers for a number of different jobs. So we have several hundred people receiving food assistance or cash going to work each month, and going to work at you know, not all high-paying jobs like meat packing jobs, but going to work with real jobs, real salaries, and oftentimes real benefits.
Okay, and then my final question is on slide 57. I don't know who created the Can Drive pilot program, but you are aware that there's money in the transportation bill that was passed that provides scholarships for people up to 30 years old, I believe, to pay towards driver's education.
Yes, I think we learned that. When this was fun, I don't think that had not passed, Senator, when the legislature funded this program. This actually, I think, was a recommendation coming out of one of the child welfare committees, I think through Representative Kincannon and the House Social Service Budget Committee initially. But we'll certainly be taking a look at the availability of that program and marketing that as we think about this moving forward.
Okay, well, it's been a successful program, so you should probably look at that. Other questions from the committee? Senator Petty.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And thank you, Secretary, for being here. You mentioned about the ABC program, which I can't say enough about how successful that's been. But you mentioned that it's not part of the federal clearinghouse. So what does it take? Because that's not a program we're just using. We adopted it from another state that's been highly successful with it.
That's a frustrating one, you know, in the sense that, you know, just the sort of criteria they might use in terms of, you know, have there been enough research studies to say it's well enough supported? And there's kind of 3 or 4 levels. And I think ABC is maybe like one level below. I mean, in terms of as they look at research and studies. So I still have hope that it will get on there someday, but I sure don't want to stop supporting it now when we know how effective it is.
I I totally agree, and it's impacting early, which is so important. The other question I had concerning on the enhancement list that we've looked at in the budget, and it was request number 6 concerning communication access services, those 2 positions with the Kansas Commission for the Deaf and Hard of Hearing. Could you expand on that? Does that have anything to do with them doing the assessments?
Yes. Yeah, let me explain that. And the reason this is in our budget is because the Kansas Commission for the Deaf and Hard of Hearing is attached to us through our Vocational Rehabilitation Services division. And so they asked us to include this request within our budget. What they want to be able to do is to, I mean, they're really thinking about this in the context of state agencies being required to provide auxiliary aids and services to achieve accessibility for all qualified individuals with disabilities. You know, most state agencies don't have funding or staffing in their budget to handle those kinds of requests for communication access. You know, oftentimes from stakeholders or people attending meetings, or it could be staff. So what their goal would be that these 2 positions would provide those resources to actually support state agencies in meeting those access demands. So that's kind of what they're looking at, is to say, we understand that agencies may not have these resources within their own budget, but they would like to have 2 staff who can provide that support.
Thank you.
Other questions? All right. Thank you, Secretary Howard. We'll move on. And I want to let everybody know, we're going to finish Children's and Families, and then we're going to start KDADs, and we have quite a few people that want to testify. If we don't get done today, we'll be meeting at 3 o'clock, I believe, on Monday. That said, I want those that are listening in that will be testifying to keep your remarks brief and to the point of what your request is, and to not read all of your testimony. Just tell us what we need to know. So that said, we'll begin now with Tammy Thomas, the Executive Director of Safe Families for Children. And WebEx, perhaps?
Yes, ma'am.
There you are.
All right. Thank you,
Welcome.
Madam Chairman, again, and members of the committee, to share with you about Safe Families for Children Kansas, and for the opportunity to present remote. It is snowing cats and dogs here in Shawnee. My name is Tammy Thomas. I serve as the State Director of Safe Families for Children in Kansas. Since taking this role in March of 2020, we have established a new chapter in the Wichita, Kansas area, as well as continuing to establish and continue to grow our chapter in the Kansas City area. Today, I'd like to take this time to share with you who we are as an organization, who we impact, how we impact Kansas families, and our request of your committee moving forward. Safe Families is an organization that is volunteer-driven and professionally supported movement serving Kansas families in crisis and beyond the crisis. Our parents maintain parental rights and full custody of their children, and our goal is to keep children safe and families together. Safe Families is not a foster care program or an adoption service. We partner with faith-based and community organizations such as police departments, schools, hospitals, KPATA, shelters, faith community and city organizations, and DCF within our local communities and counties. Preventing children and families of the trauma of engaging the foster care system is one of the goals of our organization. Focus is on family preservation, with 95% of the children that we host through Safe Families, 95% of those children return home. And the average length of stay of a hosting is 6 weeks. Average age of child being hosted is 6 to 7 years old. Who do we impact? Safe Families for Children We impact children and families at the edge of care, families who find themselves in a crisis that could lead to their engagement with DCF involvement. Families we serve are oftentimes experiencing social isolation, unemployment, homelessness, hopelessness, hospitalizations due to substance abuse, and a multitude of other things. And they're not all young people. These aren't all young parents. These are sometimes grandparents who have been caring for their grandchildren. Through a circle of support, we not only support children, but we support the parent as well. Our volunteers work to be an extension of the child's family, offering a safe environment for the children, and we walk alongside the parents to support their progress in reaching their identified goals to independence. How do we do this? We seek out volunteers through local community of schools, faith, and community organizations to provide volunteers, to move volunteers from being observers of a situation to an active participant. We focus on building relationships by surrounding a family in need with a circle of support for the child and the parent. We are a family-focused organization and not program-focused. Our volunteers go through a rigorous approval process via application, reference checks, training, fully being vetted through the KBI and the FBI, as well as fingerprinting. Our family coach supervisors, who are in the state of Kansas master level social workers, go through and perform home walk-through screenings and also take care of the required documentation as DCF would with firearm safety, corporal punishment, and water safety requirements. Our volunteers are not paid. They are volunteers. They care for children at their own expense when the child is in their home. Our volunteers are real people stepping up to do unreal work. As Secretary Howard had expressed in her testimony, we at Safe Families, you know, we talked about how Family First has been successful in keeping kids out of the system. And we really believe that Safe Families is in line with Family First and that it is a prevention service model aimed at keeping families together and kids out of our foster care system. Our request today, Madam Chair, of this committee is twofold. One, I would like to acknowledge that currently Safe Families has been supported through a grant from DCF. We are thankful for their support, enabling us to serve Kansas families within the Kansas City and Wichita areas. In order to support and engage more families across Kansas, including our rural and frontier communities, Safe Family would like to expand our presence across Kansas to include all 6 regions following the DCF structure, as Secretary Howard had referenced earlier. Our proposal today asks for $2.9 million to facilitate that statewide growth. Reality is we are still bare bones staffed here in the Kansas City and Wichita areas, and who have a growing need to help families and keep kids off the threshold of foster care and DCF engagement. In order to do so, we must continue to seek out, vet, train, and retain our volunteers. Yesterday, the House Social Service Budget Committee approved a $500,000 to help fully staff Kansas City and Wichita, as well as expand to the southeast region of Kansas. While our initial ask is bold, we would be most appreciative if at the minimum, the committee would recommend $500,000 to support Safe Families for Children. Thank you for the opportunity to share testimony, and thank you for the great work this committee does and continues to do, meeting the needs of our vulnerable communities. I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you, Tammy, for testifying. Any questions for Tammy? I don't see any. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next we have Rachel Marsh, CEO of Children's Alliance of Kansas. Rachel, will you be reading your testimony or highlighting? Thank you. Appreciate it. Thank you.
I apologize, of child welfare and child and family service organizations that work to prevent child abuse, serve children at risk of going into foster care, and serve children in foster care and adoption.
We want to highlight the successes that we've seen with DCF in the Family First Prevention Services Act, and we want to echo the governor's requests to enhance those and appreciate that request and would ask you that you would keep that in the budget. We also want to point out the progress that DCF has been making in the area of kinship families and kinship care. We believe those initiatives are also in the budget in the consensus caseload revenues and would ask that those stay in. The issue I really want to address with you today is the child welfare workforce crisis. Now, I know that you've been hearing about a workforce crisis from every industry for the last year. I would be remiss if I didn't share with you what's happening in child welfare specifically. We did a survey of our members who represent the vast majority of child welfare providers in Kansas, and we are at a 15 to 30% vacancy rate today. What that means is not a turnover rate, but a vacancy rate of up to 2 months, 3 months, 6 months, a year. We're asking for this committee to help us find the right mechanism to infuse workforce dollars. I'm asking for an amount of $10 million for not just the DCF employees, but for the community-based providers across Kansas. We think that would be an enhancement to the governor's budget to DCF to then allocate according to their contracts and their providers. We feel that we are on a negative avalanche with children who, if their worker is overstressed and over caseload, then they quit. And then the next worker is more overstressed and more over caseload. So we're asking you for that one-time infusion, not a long-term enhancement, so that we can stop the negative outcomes for workforce and begin to make sure that we're turning around our workforce needs and that we can continue to basically meet the basic needs of children in foster care and early prevention services. The second item I have to ask for you today is to address the issue of the increasing complexity of needs of children entering into the foster care system. I think you know, because from previous years, I have testified before this committee and others about the challenges in our psychiatric residential treatment facility access, which, sorry, is my KDOD's budget for tomorrow, or for later today. We have similar challenges in our qualified residential treatment facilities, which are under DCF. We have become, DCF foster care has become the place where when children can't get the community services that they need, they come into foster care. Children with severe juvenile offender behaviors who cannot remain safe at home because they're a danger to a sibling or a caregiver. Children who haven't been able to access, due to other agencies' workforce challenges, community supports to help them in the home. And also, as I mentioned, the issue of youth who are needing to be in high levels of care, but simply can't access that care. They're being placed in foster care, but we're not equipped at this time as a system with the specialization that we need to meet the needs of these unique populations, some of which are complex, so juvenile offender behaviors and mental health challenges, or IDD issues and juvenile offender behaviors. What we're asking for you to consider, again, is another enhancement for the budget for DCF to develop a pilot grant program so that we can look at innovative ideas such as therapeutic foster care with specialization, so that we can start to combine the multidisciplinary needs and bring substance abuse treatment together with mental health therapy in a foster care environment, as an example. One of our members is here today and we'll give you another example. So we are asking for those two enhancements. It's totaling $20 million. Again, not to the Children's Alliance, not to any particular member, but to DCF so that they can infuse these investments that are needed for our child welfare system. Thank you for your time. I'm happy to stand for questions.
Thank you, Rachel. Any questions? Senator Kirshen.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for your time and effort and all you do. This idea that this enhancement amount that's supposed to go that goes to DCF, how much are you going to get of that? You get $10 million and you goes to DCF. How much do you actually get then?
What I would ask for is that DCF would look at the employees that they serve through child placing agencies and residential providers and child welfare case management agencies and equitably allocate those funds out into the state. The number I came up with was that we calculated about 5,000 employees in our network. And so I just took 5,000 and multiplied it by 2,000 and came up with 10 million. And hopefully, if we can allocate that in some way, that could help us retain and recruit the most necessary staff.
The key is in allocating it. DCF does that.
DCF does that.
Do you have any say on that?
I can ask nicely. And Secretary Howard has been a good partner, and I trust that she would be equitable and look at what are the highest needs.
Other questions? Sarah Petty.
And along that line, so is that would be the emergency workforce recruitment and retention?
Yes.
Piece of that? And the other 10 million is that, I mean, we continually hear about the increasingly complex makeup of the children that are in foster care and how to be able to provide for their needs.
Yes.
Thank you.
We are asking for a pilot program grant fund for DCF to incentivize and upfront fund innovation that providers at margin simply can't front that money for.
All right, other questions? I don't see any. Thank you, Rachel.
Thank you for your consideration.
Is there anyone else here that thinks they signed up to speak to the Department of Children and Families? You, okay, I don't have your name on my list, so. Amy, what?
Amy Harmon from Calm Agency.
Did you have testimony?
Yes, I did, and I submitted it.
You did? Mm-hmm. Okay. We don't have it, so.
Oh,
We'll go look for it here in just a little bit.
do you want me to wait?
How
Give you a copy?
long is it?
My testimony that I submitted is 2 pages, and what I'm going to read to you is different, and then I can probably do it in 5 minutes. So I have 2. Okay.
Okay. So go ahead and get started, and I'm going to go see if we've got it. But would you spell your last name? I didn't hear it.
Sure. Harmon. I could.
Harmon.
Harmon.
Okay, thank you. Are you checking? Okay, go ahead and continue. Okay. Do you have something, or are you just going to, okay. Thanks. All right, go ahead and continue.
Madam Chair and members of the committee, my name is Amy Harmon. I have been a licensed master's level social worker for 24 years and CEO at Calm Agency for the past 7 years. Calm is an active board member of Children's Alliance of Kansas, and Rachel Marsh asked me if I would be encouraged to introduce myself to you today. Calm is a small foster care placement agency of licensed master's level and bachelor level social workers. Formerly, we were Catholic Charities, but in 2015, they changed their mission and statement and closed the program. Calm was opened by 3 social workers, practicing together since 1997, and 1 office manager who is an adoptive parent. Currently, we have grown with 6 licensed social workers. If you're curious what CALM stands for, it's Christine, Amy, Laura, and Michelle. I tell them they can't get rid of me because I'm their only Val. Because we're so small, we wear many hats, and today I get to be CEO, but my favorite job is being a social worker, supporting our CALM super foster parents. Since privatization in the late 1990s, our team of workers have been used to building foster homes for tough kids. During that 20-year time frame, we have become somewhat specialized in experts working with high complex acuity kids, children such as nonverbal autism, medical fragile, IDD, and others requiring out-of-home care in creative ways. Here's an example of a typical level of child that we work with. Let's call her Sue. It begins when we receive a scary referral with all of her behaviors and actions and pages of her life history. In this case, Lake Mary was her home for the past 2 years, and resources are vetted to explore the options to level her down. 22 people were on a conference call. Any guesses what the first questions my foster parents asked me? Well, it's what's her size? Well, she's 6 foot, 150 pounds. For many, with her prior history of aggression, this would have been a deal breaker. Oh, and by the way, she also has a dual diagnosis of IDD and episodes of delusion. Ask her what she wants to be when she grows up, she would tell you a truck driver. You know, those trucks that turn into transformers, and that way she can live off the grid and swim in her pool all day. The team, with a little hesitation, agrees to place Sue with us and our super parent family. Attachments and connections are made, but not without its challenges. My personal favorite of the numerous critical incidents that took place was when the foster parent called me late one evening and physical aggression had taken place towards foster dad, who was attacked randomly. It was Halloween season. She was obsessed with vampires, and somewhat this was a catalyst for her attack. After she regulated and mended with foster dad, our super parents tried to process with her the lessons about hurting others, to which she proclaimed she was a vegetarian vampire and had no intentions of biting foster dad. Well, the good news is he didn't get bit, but the best news is that she didn't disrupt from this family in foster home or return to hospitalization at a PRTF. This is the daily work that our super parents and bonus social workers do on our team. For many placements, this might have been a deal breaker, even though foster dad was kind of beat up. We're proud of our dedicated families, and although I bring you this story laced with humor, sometimes for us to keep the enjoyment of our jobs and preventing burnout, we must find the light and strength underneath the trauma and the tragedy and the overwhelmed systems that we all work with daily. CALM's expertise and experienced social workers, along with our skills of our super parents, together in partnership with the other agencies, work hard to try to maintain stability for complex children. We have provided our written testimony outlining CALM's proposed pilot project to expand the number of super parents that CALM has the capacity to develop. We are here to highlight the support needed for children identified as medically and behaviorally complex. We know CALM has the capacity to make a difference. I love my job, so I'll do my best not to get carried away and ramble. I think I almost am at 5 minutes, but our pilot program is one small step to a bigger part of the solution with KDADS, DCF, and other agencies and Children's Alliance. If you're not captivated specifically with our pilot project, we would vigorously support consideration for DCF, Children's Alliance, and KDADS to be additionally funded to make sure resources are available to our youth. Children today are more complex, and the model that we used recruiting homes 10 years ago does not meet the needs of today's children. As frontline workers, we believe it's in the best interest of children to make an impact on this complex population. Thank you for your consideration. I'm available for any questions.
All right, Amy, thank you. Do you have two sets of testimony? Because we found it in KDADS. But
Nope,
that is it.
the one that I gave you. If it
Yeah,
looks like
okay,
yeah.
well, we found it finally, but here, and I've got one, so you can have this one back if
Okay.
you need it. So any questions for Amy? All right, I don't see any at this time. Anyone else that we missed? We have a question. Senator Petty.
So Amy, the funding that it was mentioned in the last part of your testimony, that's part of the bigger piece of funding, or that's over and above? I mean, Rachel had mentioned 10 million in that category, and you have 450,000 in yours.
So we are members of Children's Alliance, but this project pilot would be specifically to support what we do as a child placement agency for the families that we serve. We currently have 36 licensed foster homes, and we're wanting to build the capacity of 15 more homes that could license up to 2 children to serve these complex needs. So that would potentially build a capacity of 30 beds to work with children in family settings. Does that answer your question?
It does. Thank you very much.
Right.
All right, thank you. And staying with DCF, we have Patrick Jonas, CEO, Cerebral Palsy, on WebEx.
Yes.
Welcome, Patrick.
Thank you very much, Chairwoman, again, and members of the Human Service Subcommittee. I will be brief. We have run a program through Department of Children and Families medical equipment project since its inception in July of 1996. It's annually a grant for $125,000, and it's to provide equipment for persons with disabilities. Most importantly is for those pieces of equipment that either are for uninsured families or for those that insurance equipment that insurance does not cover. And we provide matching funds through partnerships with 16 different United Way agencies. And if I can direct you to the second to last paragraph, we've administered this grant for 25 years, served over 4,100 clients in 101 different counties throughout the state, and have provided over $500,000 in match to this program through the years. And so what we are requesting is a proviso that would allow CPRFA to be designated as this administrator. Going forward, we are embarking on a new fundraising initiative with 6 new community foundation partners, and we really would need the assurance from the state that these dollars would be available, because we are targeting these to match in an endowed fundraising project that we are just now implementing. And we have a goal of raising endowed funds that would generate $125,000, but it's listed as a 5-year project. And so that is the request, not additional funds, just a proviso.
All right, Patrick, I'm just trying to see the, you just want a proviso, and I'm trying to see the dollars?
No additional
Language,
dollars.
just language.
Correct.
Okay, thank you. Any
Thank
other
you.
questions for Patrick? All right, thank you, Patrick, for being here today.
Thank you very much.
All right, last call on DCF. Anyone else? All right, we will close out DCF and open the hearing on the Kansas Department for Aging and Disability Services. And we'll bring up Matthew Moore to explain the budget.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. Matthew Moore, Legislative Research. I'll provide a brief overview of the budget for KDADS. Really, I'll go over a few of the first pages and then kind of a little bit more detail on the enhancements. You should have before you a copy of my budget analysis. The first page is 1096. Kansas Department for Aging and Disability Services is responsible for the Medicaid long-term care payments, survey and certification of adult care homes, behavioral health programs, home and community-based services for older adults and persons with disabilities, as well as oversight of the 4 state hospitals. You'll see on the next page, 1097, at the very top, the legislature last year approved $2.3 billion, including $873.9 million from the state general fund. Subsequently to that, the agency received approximately $64.3 million SGF and reappropriated funds from 21. These were primarily due to Medicaid-related expenditures that the human services caseloads came in under the estimate, and so those funds reappropriated into the next year, as well as a few delays in some programs that I'll discuss in a moment. There at the middle underneath figure 2, you can see that the agency requested an estimate of $2.4 billion, including $894.7 million SGF. This is a decrease of $6.9 million below the amount approved. Really the significant items I'd like to touch upon are those 3 bullets that kind of continue on to the next page. The first being a continued COVID-19 pandemic relief funds. Originally in last year, all of those funds were received in 21, didn't anticipate any additional funds in 22. But if you look at figure 2 there, you can see there's a little sliver of a green line that's indicating that the agency had received some additional COVID-19 funding. And so there's a somewhat sizable amount that increased the budget. The next item is the 10% increase in the Fmap rate for HCBS waiver services. Over the last 2 years, you've heard a lot of the 6.2% increase due to the pandemic. This was an additional 10% increase specifically for HCBS waiver services that was included in the ARPA Act last year that provided kind of a 10% bump for additional services and sort of reinvestment of SGF. So the agency receives an additional 10% just for HCBS services and then takes those savings in SGF and sort of reinvests it in initiatives to assist with sort of the direct care network for HCBS services. The last bullet there is sort of some delayed implementation of programs. As I indicated with the reappropriations, there were several programs that were delayed into 22. The two I'd like to point out is just those beds and hays that were appropriated in the 2020 session kept being delayed and reappropriated. In my understanding, they had signed a contract with KBC to provide those beds. And while the contract is signed, those beds will be likely opening in 2023. The second would be the remodel of the Biddle building at Osawatomy. Again, another initiative that was in the 2020 session approved and then sort of reappropriated as that project was delayed due partly to COVID. I'll note on 1098 there at the very top, kind of provides some overview of that Biddle building. There is a supplemental request for $1.7 million additional from what has been kind of reappropriating due to increased costs and labor to sort of finish out that. My understanding is B2 will be opened here in March, and then they'll begin construction on the East Biddle building for opening in 23. There in the middle of 1098, you can see the governor recommended $2.3 billion, including $830.7 million SGF, as a decrease of $78.1 million below the agency's revised estimate. Again, so sort of those three bullets there in the middle of 1098. The main decrease is just due to Human Services consensus caseloads. So when we reassessed in the fall, that estimate was $89.7 million lower, just due to a lower than anticipated Medicaid eligible population. The second item is the governor's 24/7 pay plan. As you might have heard, particularly I think last week with the state hospitals, the governor had her 24/7 pay plan to increase salaries for nursing staff at those 24/7 facilities, including the hospitals. That is included in 22. It's approximately $9.6 million. What I will note is that for 22, those expenditures are being paid with ARPA funds, federal COVID relief funds. However, you'll see in 23, there's a little bit of a different approach. That final bullet is crisis intervention centers. The recommendation includes approximately $2 million for the implementation of crisis intervention centers. My understanding is you might remember and know of crisis stabilization centers, which we currently have. My understanding is this is sort of the next step above that, that would allow for some involuntary care for individuals in crisis within the community. My understanding is KDADS is working on promulgating regulations for that, and this funding is to support that implementation of those programs. There at the bottom, you can see the beginning of fiscal year 23. The agency requests $2.3 billion, including $903.4 million SGF, which is a decrease of $19.4 million below the agency's revised estimate. On 1099, you can see a little bit more in depth. The first two bullets I would just indicate are more of that kind of coming out of the pandemic, sort of decreased funding associated with COVID-19 pandemic relief, and then as well as sort of the return to the regular Fmap distribution. So as I mentioned before, you have both that 6.2% increase in the Fmap as well as the 10% for HCBS services. Those are sort of anticipated to end in fiscal year 23, and so the agency is sort of anticipating that distribution to return to normal. The next three bullets are more of the enhancements, which I'll go over here in a few moments. There at the bottom, you can see the governor recommended $2.4 billion, including $970.4 million SGF, which is an increase of $20.4 million, including $67 million SGF above the agency's request. That first bullet is sort of kind of continuation of some of those items the governor included in her FY22 request, the first being kind of continuation of those 24/7 pay plan expenditures, which is approximately 18 million. However, the big difference is where in FY22, those are being paid with federal ARPA funds. FY23, those will be paid with SGF. The next item is, as I mentioned, the crisis intervention centers. The governor's recommendation includes continuing funding for that and increasing it to $10 million. That last item there on 1099 is the expansion of mental health services. So the governor's recommendation also includes some funding for mobile competency evaluation, as well as expansion of regional hospital beds, which you heard a little bit about last week with the state hospitals, and I know that the agency has a little bit more in depth in their presentation today. On 1100 there, just wanted to note that the recommendation also includes a shift for mental health expenditures. Traditionally, there's been a transfer from the State Highway Fund of approximately $9.7 million, as well as some funding through the Children's Initiative Fund, approximately $3.8 million. Those items, the expenditures won't go away. They're still being funded, but in 23, they'll be funded with SGF rather than the State Highway Fund and the Children's Initiative Fund. The next item is just the decreases in the enhancements, which I'll go over again. One item I would like to note is that the governor's recommendation also includes a transfer from the CanCare Ombudsman's office, which is currently in KDADS, and shifting that office into the Department of Administration to reflect that creation of the Office of Public Advocates within the Department of Administration. With that, I would just note that 1102 provides a little bit more in-depth description of fiscal year 22, and 1106 provides a little bit more in-depth description of 23, but I would just direct you to 1110 to provide a little bit more description on the enhancements and supplementals. There on 1110, you see the supplemental request for FY21 or 22. That is just two items: the lapse of some of those reappropriations that I mentioned earlier related to Medicaid expenditures, and then that additional $1.7 million for the increased costs associated with the Biddle remodel at Osawatomy. I would note on 1111, request number 2 there, I have a sort of grouped several Medicaid-related requests that the agency had made. The first item being 23.2 million all funds, including 9.3 million SGF, to standardize and increase PCA services for the waivers. These are personal care assisted services, so individuals assisting individuals on the waiver. Through the last several years, there have been increases here and there that has provided some discrepancy between those rates for different waivers. So the agency indicated that they found instances where an individual, maybe they might be on, let's say, the brain injury waiver, be receiving personal care assisted services, but then switch over to the PD waiver, find out that they're the person that's just providing the same services they were on the BI waiver, all of a sudden is receiving a lower reimbursement rate. So that request is to increase those to kind of make them standard, and then provide a 2% bump for all of those rates. The next item is the PACE rates rebase. So the PACE is the program for all-inclusive care for the elderly, very similar to how the waivers function. Though federal rules require that those rates be rebased approximately every 3 years, this is kind of that 3-year mark, and so the agency requested funding to rebase those rates, and is including that that was included in the governor's recommendation. The next item there is to reduce the PD waiver wait list. Currently, the enhancement section here says about 90, almost, well, 2,200 individuals on the waiting list. The most recent estimate I have for that is about 2,142. The agency had included a little bit of a request in there to provide funding to remove about approximately 350 people from the wait list onto the waiver for the PD waiver, but that wasn't included in the governor's recommendation. The next item is the increase the cap on assistive services, and you can see that sort of description on 1112. The agency had requested approximately 1.8 million all funds, approximately 700,000 SGF, to increase cap for this sort of code on the waivers. These are services to allow for home modifications, vehicle modifications, and durable medical equipment. Currently, there's a lifetime cap of approximately 7,500, and the agency indicated that hasn't been increased in several decades. So it requested some funding to raise that increase to 10,000 for FY23. On 1113, there's some requests specifically related to the IDD waiver. The first is to increase the TA 1000 specialized nursing code for the IDD waiver. You might recall last year that code was increased to $43 an hour on the TA waiver. However, there are some individuals on the IDD waiver that receive that code as well. And then the agency found, much similar to the assisted services, that now that that waiver's been increased, that code's been increased to $43 on the TA waiver, it found some issues with providers being willing to provide those services on the IDD waiver. So it sought some funding to increase that, for that same increase that was given last year on the TA waiver to the IDD waiver. And that was included in the governor's recommendation. The next item is the IDD waiver wait list. Agency had requested some funding to remove individuals from the wait list and put them onto the waiver. Currently, there's approximately 4,600 people on the wait list, but that was not included in the governor's recommendation. Additionally, they had requested some funding for CDDO administration, so to provide a little bit more funding for CDDOs, kind of to provide administrative services, which was not included in the governor's recommendation as well. The last sort of grouping of enhancements I'd like to touch upon are 1114. There that are related to facilities. So the agency has oversight of the hospitals and provides some surveying of licensed care homes in Kansas. That first item is some additional funding for FTEs for the surveying and credentialing staff. These are the individuals that go into the nursing facilities, assisted living facilities, and survey to make sure that they're in compliance. They had originally requested 15 FTEs. The governor sort of came in and gave about half of that for FY23. The next item is fingerprint background checks. The agency is required to provide or required to get fingerprinting for as part of its credentialing duties. It's found a discrepancy between the amount that it's allowed to charge and what it actually costs. And so it requested some funding to sort of fill in that gap, which was not included in the governor's recommendation. The next item would be an additional state hospital commission FTE. It had originally asked for an FTE for the State Hospital Commission to help with the implementation of a new performance management system to track sort of employee training across all of the state hospitals. That was not included in the governor's recommendation. And then the final item is just some additional SIBF funding for capital projects at the state hospitals. You heard a little bit about this last week with the when we heard the state hospitals. I would note on 1116, it's just a little bit of a discussion on the Human Services Consensus Caseload estimates. I believe you might have heard that earlier in session. Megan provided a overview for you. Just the two things I'd like to note for fiscal year 23 is that that estimate did include a 3% increase for nursing facilities, as well as including all PACE expenditures within the Human Services caseload. So traditionally, PACE has sort of been split into two sort of estimating. The first would be in human services caseload that was medical expenditures, and then non-medical expenditures were sort of calculated outside of caseloads. This year, for fiscal year 23, all PACE expenditures have been included in that consensus estimate. Now, this won't increase necessarily any expenditures overall currently. It's just sort of how those estimates are arrived at. The remainder of the budget analysis just goes into more detail on the various programs for the agency. I would just bring your attention to 1137 to just touch upon the capital improvements section. Again, KDADS is in charge with providing oversight to the hospitals. One of those duties is receiving the capital improvements and sort of determining priority amongst the 4 state hospitals. You heard a little bit about this last week, so I won't go into too much depth. I will just note that last week, the agency had its hearing before Joint Building Committee, which adopted the governor's recommendation. And with that, I would stand for any questions.
Questions for Matthew? Senator Petty.
Matthew, you mentioned that on page 116, the Human Service Consensus caseload and about PACE. Now, if I understand this correctly, instead of being separated out in 2 parts, to be all together, and you said that wouldn't really make any difference, but I thought back earlier that on the gray pages that when it mentioned PACE, that it said it was a 6.5% increase. Could you explain that?
Certainly, Madam Chair, members of the committee. So, yes, so it doesn't have an overall increase. What I will note, so when I spoke about the PACE rebate, that is included in the governor's recommendation, but because it is factored into caseloads, that's where that increase occurs, is now within that caseloads. So when PACE was included, the decision was made to put all PACE expenditures into caseloads, they included that increase to rebase the PACE rates for FY 23. So that is discussed elsewhere because it was requested prior to including PACE into caseloads, but that is also factored into that human services caseloads.
And just so I understand, rebase PACE, does that mean what does rebase PACE mean exactly?
So my understanding, and I would defer to the agency a little bit more in depth if I speak incorrectly. When you have, for instance, with the nursing facilities, there's that rebasing of the nursing facility that's talked about I believe every year, of kind of bringing those rates that we pay to providers up to reflect sort of current costs. And so that rebasing is to say, okay, here are the PACE rates. Let's readjust them based on of what current costs are. Normally, you see that with the nursing facilities.
Okay, so that helps. Thank you.
Other questions? All right, thank you, Matthew. Next, we'll have Secretary Howard up. And Secretary Howard, just if you could try to be a little more efficient with your time. The Senate does not have a standing committee like the House, and we're having a very hard time trying to get everybody in. And just so everybody knows, we have 23 conferees, and we would like to be able to get through as many as we can today. I know we won't get to all of them, but we will. We're getting a time at 3 o'clock on Monday to finish everything up. So at this time, Secretary Howard, would you give your budget overview, please?
Thank you, Senator. I'll try to be good. Start on page 4. Program area is within KDADS. And spend just a few moments. Some key issues within each of those areas, and then we'll Sports Commission on page 5. This is the commission that has oversight of the HCBS programs, also the nursing facility program and reimbursement and aging services. And on page 6, within our budget, we also pull out some of those Medicaid pieces, also connected to this commission. On page 7, related to that commission, I just wanted to highlight for you a handful of those priorities and issues for the commission. The 10% Fmap enhancement projects that Matthew referenced earlier. We will receive about $80.3 million during the course of this project. Our focus areas are on workforce, employment, and access to care. Our highest priority area has to do with premium pay, recruitment, and retention bonuses for the direct care workforce. That's the project we're working hardest on. That's the bulk of those resources. I'll move on to page 8, the Behavioral Health Services Commission, Mental Health Services, Substance Use Disorder Services. And on page 9, you can see some of those key priorities and issues. One of the areas that my team has been working hard on and has had a planning grant to kind of assist the state as a whole with this has to do with the comprehensive 988 plan related to the 988 suicide number going into effect. And we did also implement the $3 million that you gave us towards expansion of the suicide prevention contact centers within Kansas. A couple of other things I would mention on this slide, based on action by the legislature last year, we're working very hard on the effort to begin the certified, the CCBHC program, the Certified Community Behavioral Health Clinics. That's included a lot of work with our Medicaid partners, draft state plan amendments, rate development, policies, and procedures. But we will be ready to go in May as the statute entailed for some CMHCs to become CCBHCs at that time. The SIA program, the State Institutional Alternatives, we talked with you a bit during the state hospitals about the fact that we've stood up SIA beds. And I would note that you do have a chart on page 52 that you can refer to later that would show you where adult inpatient psychiatric beds are in the state. And those with a double asterisk in the legend are those that have contracted to be state institution alternatives. Lastly, with behavioral health, we did sign a contract with KVC for an acute inpatient psychiatric facility for youth in Hayes. They will be busy during this calendar year with the remodeling, the capital improvement side of that. We'll begin to serve children early in 2023. That will be 14 beds. I think when we talked about this last year, discussion had been around 8 beds. That will be a 14-bed facility in Hayes to serve youth, with 10 of those beds, no eject, no reject. Our survey, certification, and credentialing commission is next on page 10. And then on page 11, just call out a few of the key issues with this commission. This is one of the important pieces that this commission is working on is the finalization of the regulations for crisis intervention centers, those community-based centers that would be able to take patients who are involuntary on 72-hour holds. Those regulations are currently being reviewed by the Department of Administration, and we'll talk about a budget enhancement related to that. The State Hospital Commission, I don't feel like I need to spend time on that because we talked about that last week, except to say you will see the 24/7 pay increase reflected in the KDAD's budget. You will also see additional funding I'll speak to later related to addressing the backlog and competency evaluations through some added resources there as well. I am also proud to say that with regard to our state hospitals, we're very close to signing the contract for the vendor for the electronic health record system, so they could kind of move into at least the last century, if not this century, and join the rest of the world with electronic health records. With that, I will actually turn you over to page 16 and 17. KDAS does not have as many dollars from related to COVID-19 response as you saw within DCF, but we have received some funding. Page 16 describes the funding we received through the CARES and SPARK process through the Recovery Office. You'll recall much of that went to adult care homes. Some also went to behavioral health providers. On page 17, we list the funding that came to KDADS directly through the various federal relief bills. And you'll see the most significant of those dollars are some emergency grants related to mental health and substance use. And then towards the bottom of the page, a couple of different items related, for example, to meals and congregate meals, home delivered meals, and nutrition for seniors. I'm not going to spend time on the budget summaries. The KDADS budget, again, is not skewed as much as the DCF budget was with regard to COVID, but you can look at those charts on the coming pages. And I will move you past those 2022 charts all the way over to slide 24, which speaks about the 2022 budget additions. The governor has recommended $13.4 million as supplementals in the current year, $2 million from SGF, $1.7 million from SIBF. And if you look at the very next page, that will break those out. Matthew did a good job of talking about the added SIBF dollars related to the remodeling at Biddle and some of the increased costs related to that. We would ask you to support that. The second is a $2 million state general fund recommendation from the governor to allow us to begin to provide support to those communities who will be ready to stand up crisis intervention centers as those regulations are finalized. And you'll see a $10 million amount in the 23 budget. Just a context piece here. The legislature has very generously funded crisis stabilization centers through dedicated lotto revenue. We can receive up to $8 million from those lotto vending machines, and those are helping to support those crisis stabilization centers that are serving voluntary clients across the state in a number of communities. And you also have a map at the end of your testimony that would show you where those current crisis stabilization centers are. That's on page 54. And new ones that are close to opening, such as Lawrence, and some additional planning happening, for example, in Pittsburgh and Leavenworth. What's different about the crisis intervention centers are that these would serve involuntary patients for that 72-hour hold in the community. Direct impact not just on state hospital admissions, but on law enforcement, hospital emergency rooms, and the like. And then the other supplemental pieces are just the SPARK dollars in the current year related to the 24/7 hospital-based pay. So again, two primary new items that you had not heard about during the state hospital budgets. For fiscal year 23, again, I will skip all of these charts and take you all the way over to page 32, which begins to talk about the governor's budget additions. I think Matthew did a good job of talking about the consensus caseload estimates, but the Governor Kelly has recommended enhancements for KDADS, the total just under $67 million from the state general fund, about $83 million all funds. You can see summary charts of those on the next two pages. And I would have you turn to page 35, and I'll talk about all of those enhancements in just 4 buckets instead of the 10 or 12 that are there. The governor's recommended an investment of about $29.3 million in additional services related to the mental health safety net. The first does have to do with the crisis intervention centers that I just talked about in the 2022 budget. The governor's recommended $10 million in 2023 as we would stand up those centers. And again, I think I already spoke to the focus of this slide in terms of the need for new revenue outside of that available to the existing crisis stabilization centers. The second part of the mental health safety net recommendations is that recommendation to expand community-based competency evaluations and restoration. You know, when folks need a competency evaluation to see if they're competent to stand trial, but they go to Larned State Hospital or the state security hospital, to the state security hospital. If they're found not competent, they go there for restoration services. We have waiting lists that have certainly been exacerbated by reductions we've had to do in census due to both the pandemic and to workforce challenges. And you've heard all about those. We've been doing some mobile competency pilot projects across the state. We've done competency at jails through the use of a private provider in about 24 counties. What this enhancement would do would allow us to expand the workforce that's doing that. And we would include community mental health centers in that workforce to do some of that evaluation and restoration work. We have a really interesting pilot going on here in Shawnee County that's actually focused on doing that restoration work while individuals are still in the jail. This has been recommended by the 2021 Special Committee on Mental Health Modernization, the Criminal Justice Reform Commission. Significant impact on law enforcement agencies, jails, and hospitals. We have a substantive bill going along with this that will be heard in House Judiciary this afternoon. The third item related to the safety net for mental health is the governor is recommending a $15 million state general fund enhancement to contract and build capacity for 50 new regional beds. You know, when I've talked about the SIA beds, you know, those are regional hospitals who we've contracted with who take patients who would otherwise go to a state hospital. That didn't necessarily add any new capacity to the state system. What this recommendation would do is say, let's create a 50-bed regional facility. Let's have half of that be about involuntary beds, have half of that be forensic beds related to competency needs. I think we've heard for a long time concerns about whether or not we have, you know, adequate beds. And also the facet of being able to serve people close to home. And frankly, the workforce challenges, you know, across the state, but particularly as we think about Larned State Hospital, I think also make this an important recommendation. The last mental health item of, you know, 4 mental health items is a small item, but I think very important with regard to suicide prevention. The governor's recommending $1.5 million towards implementation of our new state suicide plan. And this really is for grants to local coalitions. This is about real prevention work for targeted action plans that they may have within the communities. So this is separate from 988. This isn't crisis response. This is really prevention at the local level. So that was the first bucket of enhancements. The next bucket relates to HCBS. About $13 million from the state general fund for 3 items. The first is standardizing the HCBS personal care service rates across waivers and increasing all of those rates by 2% for the personal care services. That's about a $9.3 million state general fund ask. And the IDD waiver is probably most impacted by that increase. The second is increasing the nursing rate on the IDD waiver to $43 an hour to equal what you funded on the TA waiver last year. I think Matthew already did a great job talking about that. The third item is a modest increase in the lifetime limit for what we call assistive services. There's a lifetime cap that's been at $7,500 for a couple of decades. This would increase it to $10,000. These are for things like home modifications, vehicle modifications. We know how much technology has changed and costs have increased. And then the last item I would mention in terms of enhancements is the governor's recommended 8 new health facility surveyor positions within KDADS. This is primarily targeted towards the state licensed facilities, not the federally licensed facilities. We only have 7 FTE to support our functions related to 457 facilities. Those of you who kind of been around the Bethel Committee over the years would know that we struggle to keep up with our timelines on the state license side, and this would help us immensely. The very last page related to enhancements we've talked about already. The 23 budget does include the state general fund dollars to increase the 24/7 pay plan. The remainder of the document is caseload summary and some performance-based budgeting, and I will let you look at those on your own, Madam Chair, and stop for questions.
Thank you, Secretary. I meant to ask Matthew about the Biddle, trying to figure out what page that's on, the Biddle improvements, but it was also challenges in employment.
We had added costs related to the remodeling. That's what the $1.7 million is connected to. I was trying to find that.
It says it, okay, it's on, I'm finding it in our budget analysis, but it says that was, the remodel was delayed. Okay, due to supply and labor issues.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
no, I was more concerned that you were having a hard time finding people. So it had to do with the remodel itself. So
Yeah, this had to do with the whole construction industry and all the shortages and supplies and people in that industry, Senator.
okay, thank you. Other questions for the Secretary? All right. Will you be staying with us? Or?
I will, Senator. Yes.
Okay, thank you. All right, thank you very much. First, I want to ask if anybody drove in this wonderful weather. All right, why don't we let you get to go first because of your bravery, right?
And do you have a hotel room ready?
Yeah, it's still snowing, by the way, so, yeah. So just tell us your name and who you are, and we'll find the testimony. Oh, okay. Yeah, you would have had to go last. Okay. No, I think they found it. CEO Southwest Development. Go ahead and continue. We'll find it. We'll let you know if we can't find it. Yeah.
We have an office in Garden City and an office in Great Bend. We do not provide the direct day-to-day services that individuals on the IDD Hcbs waiver need. We have 29 affiliates that provide those vast array of services. We currently serve 1,025 individuals, of which 321 are on the wait list. As one of the 27 CDOs across the state of Kansas, we have a number of roles that we fill, and those roles have increased over time. We continue to meet the needs of the Kansas residents through building capacity for a network of services, service affiliates, increasing need for community partners. We've had a number of issues that we've dealt with through the COVID pandemic that we've addressed because other agencies were not able to do it. That included communication with us, the providers, the families, the individuals and services. And one thing that we did in the fall of the late part of 2020, we were contacted by KDADs, and they had some iPads to distribute. We volunteered to distribute 150 iPads, which we drove across 18 counties, distributing those iPads to folks that we felt were secluded due to the pandemic and things that were going on there. One thing that we have done through the years, and this is the main part of what I want to speak to you today about, is we have taken state aid and county mill, and we've used that money in what we call a local finance plan. We distribute that to our providers in different service categories. We've also had the need to utilize some of that county mill to supplement our budget. When you go back to 2010, we did use about 100,000. Today, about 285,000 approximately that we've used out of that to supplement the SDSI budget to go forward. The cost of recruiting, retaining individuals, the cost of maintaining vehicles to drive across 18 counties, the cost of coming forward with technology for the Zoom and to make it where it works well with folks, because we do some things virtually now, of course, has increased. With that, what we had requested with KDADS, and they did forward that to the governor in their request, as I think was brought forth, there was $2.5 million in all funds for CDDO administration. That I just wanted to leave with you here today. We would like to see that. We think it's a good step forward, a reasonable step in working with a key partner in the IDD system. One thing I did not put in my testimony, Matt Fletcher and Dee Neiswanger with Sedgwick County CDDO, Matt with Interhab, they talk about rate increases for our providers. We are very supportive of that as well. I just did not take the time to put that in here. We have providers that we know are really struggling when you have fast food restaurants that are paying $13, $14, $15 an hour and more for starting wage entry-level positions. So we'd be very supportive of anything that can be done there to help out with providers to continue to provide services and retain a workforce. And I'm brief. I'm done.
You did a great job. So any questions for Mark? Are you heading back today?
Probably. I may or may not. To the west, it's not like this.
Oh,
So,
okay. You just gotta
I don't know
get
how
there, I
far,
guess.
though.
Okay. Did you know Earl McGinn?
Yeah, Earl was my CFO for a number of years, 19 years.
Relative.
Yeah, yep.
Very good. All right. Well, thank you for being here today and safe travels whenever you are able to go.
Thank you, I appreciate it.
All right. So I ruined it for Amy because she thought she was going to be first, but anyone else from out of town? All right. Amy, you're next. Welcome to the committee.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I will make this brief. On the first page of my testimony on behalf of the Kansas Mental Health Coalition, I have listed the governor's enhancements that our organization is keenly supportive of in relationship to our policy recommendations. I will not go through every one of them because you can see the supporting information there about why we feel that these things are so important. I would like to also bring to your attention that a number of these are things that the legislature has actually been pushing for a number of years. And so it's really great to see the governor's budget being responsive and being able to get to those priorities that maybe are not the, not the highest profile kind of items that people would see, but we obviously know how desperate the situation is for competency, evaluation, restoration, and we know how serious the issues have been relating to suicide prevention in our state. These are ongoing priorities, and I would draw your attention to our number one item there, the crisis intervention centers. You all passed that legislation several years ago. So we are thrilled to see money in the budget to get that going. That's going to be very helpful in our inpatient capacity crisis that we've had ongoing in the state. Additionally, I would just bring to your attention that there is 988 legislation out there. There's a House Bill 2281 that came out of House Health yesterday. This is a big issue. The feds passed this a year ago without accompanying funding. So it's up to the Kansas legislature and other states to get the sustainable funding put behind that program because those lines go live in July regardless. So the agency has been extremely proactive in getting all of the federal requirements met. and they have, they've done all the work that's necessary. So the next step is in your hands in seeing that this goes forward. The legislation includes a fee on phone lines, which is how the feds said that states probably ought to fund this. You know, I know that there are some concerns about that particular approach, but because it is an emergency crisis line and they have been working with the 911 coordinating council and how all of that interacts, I think that you can see that having a form of sustainable funding in the future, rather than trying to rely on some of these one-time ending balances that we have this year, it probably has a lot of merit. With that, Madam Chair, I don't need to go into too much more detail, but I do want to have also mention to you that, of course, the workforce crisis is ongoing. We do not have a lot of concrete items in place right now to deal with that, except that the CCBHC program should be very helpful once that is up and running. With that, Madam Chair, I'd be happy to take questions.
Questions for Amy? I don't see any at this time.
Thank you.
Next, we have Sean Balk. Is that how you say it? Balky, Craig Home Care. I should know by now. I think he's been here every year. Sean?
Yes, Chair McGeehan, members of the subcommittee, thank you so much for allowing me to speak today. I'll be relatively brief as well. So again, I'm Sean Balky, President and CEO for Craig Home Care. We're one of the largest providers for specialized medical care on the TA and IDD waiver in Kansas. And I want to thank you first and foremost for supporting our rate increase last year to the $43 amount on the TA waiver. Very much appreciated, helped us make some progress on that waiver. Unfortunately, as has been mentioned before, the IDD waiver did not receive the same increase to bring it to equivalent levels. So we were unable to make some of that same progress on that waiver. And we're certainly requesting, as the department did, that be supported in the budget, that as it is in the governor's budget currently. Beyond that, we're wanting to continue our request. As you recall, last year our ask was to try to bring the rate up to that $47 per hour amount. So we're continuing with that request. We feel that is at a level that's going to be required to allow us to get to that point of impact that we felt like was necessary. And, you know, to get us to be able to cover the level of hours of authorized care that are authorized by the managed care organizations. So in addition to bringing that IDD rate up to the 43, we request that both the IDD and the TA waiver SMC T1000 code be brought up to the 47. That's our ask. Ancillary to that, we certainly feel like that there has been some support of ARPA funds through the SMART committee that have been granted to hospital systems and other groups for nursing. We're putting in some proposals, and any support on those from this committee would be appreciated as well. I have some supporting documentation below. The only thing I'll emphasize on there is the kind of disparate impact that this nursing shortage, the rate differential is having a severe impact all over, but certainly in rural areas. Right now, my organization is really one of the only ones providing this type of service for rural Kansas. And we're showing roughly about a 20% less care is able to be provided this year compared to the same time last year due to the staffing challenges that we're having. We're only seeing that exacerbating and getting worse. I have a map that shows you the general areas. Those aren't unique patients. Those are areas that we provide services for patients in. That's on my second page. So visually you can see that. And again, I thank you for your time, and I'll be here for any questions.
All right, thank you, Sean. Questions for Sean? All right, thank you for pointing that out for us, that not all entities received that increase, so thank you. Next, we have Matt Johnson, Maxim Healthcare testimony in person.
I was supposed to be.
He's online now.
In person. I got snowed in a little bit. I'm from Overland Park, so.
You were wise enough to stay home. All right, welcome to the committee, Matt.
Well, thank you very much, Madam Chairman and committee members, for giving me the opportunity to speak today. My name is Matt Johnson. I'm the Director of Business Operations for Maxim Healthcare. We provide registered nurses and licensed practical nurses to patients authorized for specialized medical care. There are severely injured pediatric and adult patients with many medical complexities that require significant and continuous medical intervention. To start off, like Sean said, I want to thank the committee and the legislature as a whole for supporting the partial rate increase that we received last year. It was a great step in stabilizing the programming and creating an efficient and effective program. As thankful as we are for the increase, the current nursing landscape has continued to get worse. I wanted to give a couple of examples of what we've been seeing. We have several families throughout all of Kansas that are looking for help to fill their open needs. We're doing everything we can possible as an agency to fill these needs, to the point of sometimes we're offering almost what the reimbursement rate is right now. And in many situations, that is even being turned down. The constant negotiation and pay increase requests from our employees have slowed our scheduling and recruitment operations to almost a halt, and really the long-term impacts of that is going to be our ability to continue to take on these patients. Another example I have is in 2021, Maxim had a net loss in employees working in the field for the first time in my 15-year career. Nurses work in home health care for a myriad of different reasons, but pay is usually not their primary driver. These are some of the most compassionate and caring nurses in the industry, but this healthcare setting has always been looked at as different from its facility equivalents. The pay gap between home care and other healthcare settings has simply gotten too great. The other factors that drove nurses to the HCBS settings can no longer supersede the pay they can receive elsewhere. This is causing a mass exodus of home care employees that are working in the field. And home care is the most desired setting that patients would like to receive their care in, and also is the most cost-effective setting. These nurses are continuing to be nurses, just not impacting the HCBS setting. And we are just hitting the tip of the iceberg right now. Many of these nurses are staying with their patients because they have a genuine connection with them and their families. It is when the patient no longer needs service for one reason or the other that we're seeing nurses decline going to meet other patients, and they're choosing to go into another healthcare setting. These services take care of the most vulnerable population in the state. I provided testimony that shows investing in this program has a great ability to create cost savings within the healthcare ecosystem by reducing unnecessary hospitalizations and delayed discharges from the hospitals. I can go more in depth into that data if anyone on the committee would like. I do want to ensure the committee is aware that it was mentioned earlier about the KDAD's bonus, recruitment and retention bonuses that they are working on. I do want to shine a light that skilled licensed providers like nurses and therapists are not included in this. Those are only for unlicensed non-medical personal care attendants. So even relief from those funds that are being worked on would not impact this nursing population. I believe a market-based rate increase will help us deal with some of these nursing challenges. And my request is that specialized medical care is increased to a minimum of $47 an hour. Thank you very much for your time, and I'll be here for any questions that the committee might have.
All right, thank you, Matt. Any questions for Matt? Senator Petty.
Matt, thanks for joining us from your snowy home. Do you know how, I think you were referencing that 10 million for emergency workforce recruitment and retention. That you're saying that does not include in skill employees, is that correct?
Yes, that is correct.
And then on the recommendation to raise everything to the both the T1000 reimbursement to $47 an hour. Do you know, I know the governor has in her budget to bring the one category up to 43, but I don't know, do you know what that increase was going to cost? I guess we'll have to go to staff to
It was a prorated. Our request last session was to go to the 47, and I'd have to look back and see. We do have a fiscal note on what the rest of the proration would be. I'd have to go back and look at that and get that for the committee. I don't know the exact dollar amount, as we had the fiscal note based on the old rate to 47. Now it would be, since it's 43 to 47, I don't have that exact number.
Thank you. Okay.
All right, thank you, Matt. Lynn, you're up next, but I have 2 senators that need to leave. And then, so can you make it on Monday at 3?
I will make that work.
You will, okay. All right, so we are going to stop here because I'm going to lose my other 2 senators. And we are working on a time, we believe we have it. It'll be 3 o'clock on Monday and in this room, most likely. So we'll go 3 o'clock until we finish, and there's nothing else to come before us at this time. We are adjourned.